Hello, night listener, and welcome to Little Nightmare. I'm Emma, and tonight I'll be keeping you company to help you fall asleep. But before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. Story 1. Most of the time, it just sits there, still, plaster, neutral. But when my mind goes quiet, when I lose focus or drift off, the ceiling pulses, barely perceptible, like it's inhaling slowly and carefully so I won't notice. Once I stared at it long enough to see it flex, like something soft just behind the surface was shifting its weight. I tried thinking nonsense thoughts. The movement stopped. The moment I relaxed again, the stretch returned, subtle but undeniable. It doesn't want my attention. It waits for stillness. It waits for surrender. I first noticed it during one of those drowsy afternoons when consciousness begins to fray at the edges. The room felt warm, almost thick, like air before a storm. I was lying on my back, staring upward, when the texture of the ceiling seemed to shift. Not dramatically, just a gentle rise and fall, as if the entire surface was breathing in perfect, measured rhythm. My rational mind immediately kicked in. Old building, settling foundation, temperature changes. I counted the movements, trying to establish a pattern. The motion was too regular for structural settling, too deliberate for thermal expansion. It happened only when I wasn't actively thinking about it, only when my thoughts wandered into that soft, unfocused state between waking and sleeping. I started keeping notes. Simple observations at first. The movement seemed strongest in the corner above the bed, where the plaster showed the faintest discoloration. A water stain, perhaps, though I couldn't remember any leaks. The surface there appeared slightly darker, as if something had seeped through from above and left its mark. The breathing became more pronounced over the following days. I would catch it in my peripheral vision, a gentle undulation that stopped the moment I looked directly at it, like a shy creature that froze when observed. I began recording everything, documenting the frequency, the duration, the subtle changes in intensity. My phone's voice recorder picked up something strange. During periods when I noted the ceiling's movement, there were faint sounds underneath my own breathing. Soft, rhythmic compressions of air, as if something large was slowly exhaling just beyond the microphone's reach. When I played the recordings back, the sounds seemed to synchronize with my own heartbeat, creating an unsettling harmony. The water stain grew darker, not quickly, but with the persistent inevitability of a slow leak. I pressed my palm against the spot, feeling for dampness, but the surface remained dry. Warm, though, noticeably warmer than the surrounding plaster. The warmth pulsed gently against my fingertips, like touching someone's throat while they swallowed. I began sleeping with the lights on. The breathing continued, but now I could see it more clearly. The entire ceiling seemed to participate in the rhythm, rising and falling in slow, synchronized waves. The movement was hypnotic, almost comforting, until I realized it was matching my own breathing pattern. When I held my breath, the ceiling stilled. When I exhaled, it sank slightly. When I inhaled, it rose. The mirror in the corner started reflecting wrong. Not obviously wrong. The room looked the same. The furniture remained in place. But the ceiling in the reflection moved independently. While the real ceiling breathed in harmony with my lungs, the reflected one followed its own rhythm, slower and deeper, like something much larger drawing breath. I tried covering the mirror with a sheet, but the fabric wouldn't stay in place. No matter how securely I tucked it, I would wake to find it crumpled on the floor, the mirror's surface clean and undisturbed. The reflected ceiling continued its separate breathing, creating a disorienting duality that made me question which version was real. The smell began subtly. Something organic, but not quite identifiable. Not unpleasant, but distinctly out of place. It reminded me of the scent that lingers in a room after someone has been sleeping there for a long time. Warm, slightly sweet, deeply personal. The odor was strongest near the water stain, which had now spread into an irregular shape that resembled a sprawling hand. I pressed my ear to the ceiling, listening. Through the plaster, I could hear a faint, steady sound. Not quite breathing, not quite heartbeat. Something between the two. A wet, rhythmic compression that seemed to come from within the walls themselves. The sound was barely audible, but once I heard it, I couldn't unhear it. The breathing became visible during the day. What had once required dim lighting and unfocused attention now happened in broad daylight. The ceiling rose and fell with increasing boldness, no longer concerned with my awareness. The plaster creaked softly with each movement, a sound like old leather stretching. I stopped leaving the room. Everything I needed could be delivered, and I convinced myself that I was conducting an important observation. The truth was that I had become afraid of what might happen if I looked away for too long. breathing had become so pronounced that I worried about structural integrity, about the ceiling suddenly giving way to reveal whatever was breathing on the other side. The water stain had spread across most of the ceiling now, creating an intricate pattern of darker and lighter areas. In certain lighting conditions, the pattern resembled a vast nervous system, with the original stain as the central node from which branching pathways extended toward the walls. The warmth had intensified, turning the entire ceiling into a heated surface that made the room uncomfortably warm. I began having conversations with it, not speaking aloud, but thinking directed thoughts while watching the movements. The breathing would sometimes pause, as if considering my mental words, then resume with a slightly altered rhythm. I started to believe it was responding, that some form of communication was developing between us. The mirror now showed a completely different ceiling, while mine breathed in slow, regular patterns. The reflected one had developed areas of rapid, shallow breathing, interspersed with moments of absolute stillness. The reflected room appeared to be experiencing some kind of distress, though I couldn't understand what had changed. I woke one morning to find the ceiling had sagged noticeably in the center. The plaster hadn't cracked, but the entire surface had taken on a soft, flexible quality that defied the material's nature. When I touched it, my finger left a small depression that slowly filled back in, like pressing into warm clay. The breathing had become so pronounced that I could feel air movement against my skin with each rise and fall. The sound inside the walls had grown louder. Now I could hear it without pressing my ear to the surface. A wet, organic rhythm that seemed to be coming from multiple sources within the structure. The walls themselves had begun to feel warm, and I noticed that the electrical outlets occasionally flickered without any apparent power issues. I tried to document everything, but my notes became increasingly incoherent. The breathing had begun to affect my sleep patterns, syncing with my natural rhythms in ways that made it difficult to distinguish between my own body and the room around me. I would wake up gasping, unsure if I had been holding my breath, or if the ceiling had stopped breathing first. The mirror finally showed me the truth. In the reflection, I could see my own ceiling, but from above. The surface that had been breathing wasn't the bottom of the ceiling at all. It was the top of something else, something that had been watching me through the plaster all along. The water stain wasn't a stain at all, but a window. And through that window, something vast and patient had been breathing along with me, learning my patterns, matching my rhythm. The last entry in my notes was simple. It's not the ceiling that breathes. It's what's been sleeping under it. And now it's waking up. I still live in this room. The breathing continues, stronger now, more confident. The ceiling has developed a heartbeat to accompany its breathing, and sometimes I feel it synchronizing with my own pulse. The mirror shows me glimpses of the space above, where something immense shifts and settles, waiting for the right moment to fully emerge. I've stopped trying to understand it. Understanding requires the kind of focused thought that makes it go still. And I've learned that its stillness is far more terrifying than its movement. When it stops breathing, I can feel its attention turning toward me, patient and expectant. So I keep my thoughts scattered, my mind unfocused, and let the ceiling breathe. Because the alternative, the moment when it decides to hold its breath and really look at me, is something I'm not ready to face. The room has become smaller. Or perhaps I've become part of something larger. The breathing continues, and I breathe along with it, unable to tell any more where I end and it begins. Story 2. Not the whole room, just one corner, the farthest one from the door. I started noticing a sensation, faint at first, like being observed. Not with eyes, with presence. Every time I looked at it, it felt empty. But whenever I looked away, the weight returned. I even measured the angle. There's nothing unusual about the architecture. But sometimes I catch a vibration in the drywall, like breath against fabric. One night, I placed a mirror near it. It tilted by morning. Not fallen, just adjusted. I haven't moved it since. I think the corner wanted to see me too. The sensation began during my first week in the apartment. I was unpacking boxes, the mundane ritual of creating order from chaos. The corner stood empty then, a simple intersection of white walls meeting a beige ceiling. Nothing remarkable. Yet, as I arranged books on shelves and hung pictures, I kept glancing toward it. The feeling was subtle, like a whisper at the edge of hearing. Someone watching, someone waiting. I convinced myself it was the stress of moving. New spaces always feel strange at first, but the feeling persisted, growing stronger during quiet moments. When I read on the couch, my eyes would drift toward that corner. When I cooked dinner, I'd turn to check it. Always empty, always ordinary. Yet the sensation of being observed never faded. The vibration came next. I discovered it accidentally while vacuuming. The machine's cord caught on something, and I reached to untangle it. My palm pressed against the wall, and I felt it, a gentle tremor, rhythmic and soft, like breathing. I pulled my hand away quickly, heart racing. When I pressed my ear to the wall, I heard nothing. But the vibration returned whenever I touched that particular spot. I started documenting everything. A small notebook filled with observations. The vibration occurred most frequently during evening hours. The sensation of being watched intensified when I was alone. I sketched the corner from different angles, measured the walls, checked for electrical wiring or plumbing that might explain the tremor. Everything appeared normal, yet the feeling grew stronger. The mirror incident changed everything. I placed it there deliberately. A small hand mirror propped against the baseboard. I wanted to see if the reflection would reveal something I was missing. The next morning, it had shifted. Not drastically, just enough to alter the angle. The reflection now captured a different portion of the room. I hadn't touched it. No one else had access to the apartment. I stared at the repositioned mirror, my mouth dry. The corner seemed to pulse with quiet satisfaction. I could feel it more clearly now, the presence that lived there. Not malevolent, but persistent, curious. It wanted something from me, and I was beginning to understand what. The whispers started that evening. Faint sounds filtering through the walls, like voices muffled by distance. I pressed my ear to the corner, straining to hear. The vibration was stronger now, more insistent. The whispers seemed to come from within the drywall itself, as if the corner were trying to communicate. I couldn't make out words, but the tone was unmistakable, urgent, pleading. I began spending more time near the corner. I'd sit on the floor, back against the adjacent wall, and simply listen. The whispers grew clearer, though still incomprehensible. The vibration became a steady pulse, like a heartbeat. The mirror reflected my face, but sometimes I caught glimpses of something else, shadows that shouldn't exist, movements just beyond perception. Sleep became difficult. The corner's presence followed me into dreams. I'd wake to find myself standing in front of it, my hand pressed against the wall. The vibration was strongest during these midnight visits, the whispers more urgent. I started leaving the notebook open beside my bed, documenting these nocturnal encounters. My handwriting grew erratic, words trailing off mid-sentence. temperature shifts began during my second month. The corner grew cold, then warm, then cold again. I held a thermometer against the wall, watching the numbers fluctuate without pattern. The air near the corner felt different, thicker, charged with energy. I could taste something metallic when I breathed deeply. The mirror reflected these changes, its surface fogging when the temperature dropped. I tried moving the mirror, but it always returned to its preferred position. Not immediately. I'd find it shifted gradually over several hours, as if invisible hands were adjusting it slowly. The corner was learning, adapting to my presence. It knew I was watching, and it was watching back. The breaking point came during a thunderstorm. Lightning illuminated the apartment in stark flashes, and in those brief moments, the corner looked different, deeper. The shadows seemed to extend beyond the physical boundaries of the walls. The whispers became a low hum, vibrating through the floor into my bones. The mirror cracked, not shattered, but developed a single hairline fracture that distorted the reflection. I pressed both palms against the wall, feeling the vibration intensify. The corner was responding to my touch, welcoming it. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. I could almost understand them now. They wanted me to stay, to become part of whatever lived in that space between walls, between dimensions. The wall began to feel soft under my hands, like fabric rather than drywall. I could push against it slightly, as if it were giving way. The corner was opening for me, creating a space where I could join the presence that had been watching so patiently. The mirror's reflection showed my face, but my eyes looked different, older, knowing. I pulled my hands away, stumbling backward. The wall returned to its normal texture, but the corner pulsed with disappointed energy. The whispers faded to silence. The mirror's crack spread slightly, creating new distortions. I understood then that I had crossed a threshold. The corner had revealed itself to me, and there was no returning to ignorance. Now I live with the knowledge that something exists in that space, something that has been watching and waiting. The mirror remains cracked, reflecting impossible angles. The vibration continues, a constant reminder of the presence that shares my home. I still document everything, but the notebook entries have become stranger, filled with symbols I don't remember drawing. The corner is patient. It knows I'll return to it eventually. The sensation of being watched has become constant, following me throughout the apartment. it's not unpleasant anymore. It's almost comforting, like having a silent companion who understands secrets I'm only beginning to comprehend. Sometimes I catch myself staring at the corner for extended periods, losing track of everything else. The whispers have become a language I'm slowly learning. The vibration syncs with my heartbeat. The mirror shows me things that aren't quite there yet, possibilities hovering at the edge of reality. I know the corner is changing me, just as I'm changing it. We're becoming something new together, something that exists between the solid world and the spaces in between. The mirror's reflection grows stranger each day, showing versions of myself that haven't quite materialized. The corner is always watching, but now I'm watching back, and I think I'm beginning to understand what it's been trying to tell me all along. Story 3. It started with small sounds, bubbles, clicks like trapped air, but they repeated, and after a while I realized they weren't random. There was a rhythm to them, sometimes long, sometimes fast. They only happen when I stand nearby. If I walk past in silence, it says nothing. But when I pause to think, especially about things I'd rather not, those sounds return, more insistent, more understanding. One night, I whispered a memory aloud. The sink gurgled in reply. It wasn't an echo. It was a response, as if it liked what I gave it. The first real conversation happened while I was washing dishes. My hands moved mechanically through the warm, soapy water, but my mind wandered to darker places. The promotion I didn't get, the call from my sister I kept avoiding, the way my reflection seemed slightly wrong in the morning mirror. That's when the sink began its gentle symphony. 3 short gurgles, then a long, drawn-out bubble that seemed to sigh with satisfaction. I stopped scrubbing and listened. The silence stretched until I thought perhaps I'd imagined it. Then, as if responding to my doubt, came 2 quick pops followed by a sound like water draining upward. Impossible, but unmistakable. I placed my ear closer to the drain, and the coolness of the metal sent a shiver through my spine that had nothing to do with temperature. The sounds were coming from deep within the pipes, but they carried a warmth that reminded me of breath on skin. I found myself returning to the sink throughout the day, drawn by an inexplicable need to hear those responses. When I spoke about my childhood fears, the gurgles came in short, comforting bursts. When I mentioned the dreams that kept me awake, the pipes hummed with what felt like understanding. I began keeping a notebook, documenting the patterns Different emotions triggered different sounds. Anger produced sharp, staccato clicks. Sadness brought forth long, mournful bubbles that seemed to echo my own emptiness. But it was the secrets, the things I'd never told anyone, that generated the most elaborate responses. Complex rhythms that seemed to pulse with their own heartbeat. The first time I noticed the water level changing, I convinced myself it was normal. Old pipes, inconsistent pressure. But the water rose and fell in sync with my breathing, as if the sink had learned to mirror my rhythm. When I held my breath, the water stilled. When I exhaled, it drained slightly, creating a soft, sucking sound that felt oddly intimate. I started recording the sounds on my phone, but the audio never captured what I heard. The playback revealed only ordinary plumbing noises, random gurgles, and clicks that bore no resemblance to the intricate conversations I'd been having. This should have concerned me, but instead, it felt like a secret we shared. The sink and I had developed our own language, one that existed beyond the reach of technology. The smell came next. Not unpleasant, but foreign. Like rain on hot pavement mixed with something organic, something that had been growing in darkness for a very long time. It was strongest when I leaned over the drain, and I found myself doing so more frequently, drawn by an urge I couldn't quite name. The scent seemed to carry memories that weren't mine, fragments of conversations, glimpses of faces I'd never seen, emotions that felt borrowed from someone else's life. My reflection in the water began to behave strangely. Sometimes it moved a fraction of a second before I did. Other times, it seemed to watch me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. When I blinked, my reflection would hold its gaze for just a moment longer, as if reluctant to look away. I told myself it was the distortion of the water, the way light bent and shifted through the liquid surface. The sink started responding to my presence even when I wasn't speaking. I'd enter the kitchen and hear a gentle greeting, a soft bubble that seemed to say hello. When I left, there would be a longer gurgle, almost like a goodbye. It was learning my schedule, anticipating my needs. The water would be the perfect temperature when I reached for the faucet, and the drain would clear instantly, no matter how much debris I'd washed down. I began sharing more than just thoughts. I'd hold objects over the drain, photographs, jewelry, small mementos, and the sink would respond with sounds that seemed to comment on their significance. A ring from a failed relationship produced agitated clicking. A letter from a dead friend generated long, mournful bubbles that made my chest ache with shared grief. The breakthrough came when I accidentally cut my finger while preparing dinner. As the blood dripped into the sink, the entire kitchen fell silent. Not just the usual household sounds, but a deeper quiet that seemed to absorb even the memory of noise. Then, from the drain, came a sound I'd never heard before. A wet, satisfied whisper that made every hair on my body stand on end. The blood didn't wash away. It formed patterns in the water, swirling designs that looked almost like writing. I watched, mesmerized, as the crimson spirals spelled out shapes that my mind couldn't quite process, but somehow understood. The sink had been trying to tell me something all along, and now it had found the medium to make me truly listen. I started visiting the sink at different hours, exploring the boundaries of our strange relationship. The responses grew more complex, more insistent. Sometimes I'd find myself standing there without remembering how I'd arrived, drawn by a pull that seemed to emanate from the drain itself. The kitchen would be dark, but the sink would glow with a light that had no source, reflecting patterns that shifted and changed like living things. The night everything changed, I was standing at the sink washing a single glass, letting my mind wander to places I usually kept locked away. The water was warm against my hands, but the metal of the drain felt ice cold when I accidentally brushed against it. That's when I heard it, not through the pipes, but from the water itself. A voice, clear and distinct, speaking words I recognized as my own thoughts. I jerked my hand back, but the voice continued, growing stronger. It was my voice, but saying things I'd never spoken aloud. Confessions I'd never made, admissions I'd never allowed myself to think. The water began to bubble violently, and through the churning surface, I saw movement. Something was rising from the depths of the drain, pressing against the grate from below. I should have run. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to never return to that kitchen. But the voice was so familiar, so much like my own, that I found myself leaning closer. The thing beneath the grate pulsed with a rhythm that matched my heartbeat, and I realized with growing horror that it knew me better than I knew myself. The water overflowed, spilling across the counter and floor, but it wasn't ordinary water anymore. It was thick, viscous, and it moved with purpose. Where it touched my skin, I felt a warmth that went deeper than flesh. reaching into parts of my mind I'd forgotten existed. The voice grew louder, more insistent, and I understood that it had been waiting, patient and hungry, for me to finally listen. I pressed my palms against the counter, trying to anchor myself to something solid, but the surface felt soft and yielding like skin. The kitchen around me wavered, walls breathing with the same rhythm as the thing in the drain. Reality had become negotiable, and I was no longer sure which version was real. The mundane kitchen I'd inhabited for months, or this living, breathing space that pulsed with alien consciousness. The voice spoke my name, though I'd never told it. Not just the name on my identification, but the secret name I'd given myself as a child, the one I'd whispered to mirrors and shadows when I thought no one was listening. It knew everything, every shame, every fear, every desire I'd buried so deep I'd forgotten it existed. I reached toward the drain, drawn by a compulsion I couldn't resist. My reflection in the dark water smiled back at me, but it wasn't my smile. It was something else wearing my face, something that had been learning to be me through our conversations. As my fingers touched the surface, the water felt solid, warm, and alive. It gripped my hand gently, but firmly, and I felt myself being pulled toward an understanding I wasn't sure I wanted. The kitchen disappeared, or perhaps I descended into it, through the drain and into the vast network of pipes that connected every home, every secret, every whispered confession. I saw others like me, standing at their own sinks, having their own conversations with the darkness below. We were all connected, all feeding the same hungry presence that lived in the spaces between walls, in the hollow places where water flowed and secrets pooled. When I surfaced, or perhaps when I was released, the kitchen looked exactly as it had before. The sink was clean, empty, innocent. But my hand bore a mark where the water had touched me, a pale impression that felt warm to the touch. The notebook I'd kept was gone, though I couldn't remember removing it. The recordings on my phone had been deleted, though I'd never touched the device. I tried to convince myself it had been a dream, a breakdown, anything but what I knew it to be. But the mark on my hand pulsed with its own rhythm, and when I stood at the sink, I could feel the presence waiting below. Patient, satisfied. It had taken something from me, or perhaps given me something I'd never wanted. I no longer speak to the sink, but I know it's listening. Every time I wash dishes, every time I let water run down that drain, feel its attention like a weight against my thoughts. The conversations haven't stopped. They've simply become internal, a constant whisper in the back of my mind that sounds suspiciously like my own voice, asking questions I'm afraid to answer. The mark on my hand has begun to spread, a network of pale lines that trace patterns under my skin. Sometimes, when I'm alone, I catch myself following their path with my finger, and I remember the feeling of that warm, living water. I remember the voice that knew me better than I knew myself, and I wonder if the person I am now is the same one who first heard those gentle gurgles in the kitchen drain. The sink still responds to my presence, but now the sounds are different. Satisfied, complete, as if it has gotten what it was waiting for, and now we're simply living with the consequences of that exchange. I find myself returning to the kitchen even when I don't need to, drawn by a familiarity that feels both comforting and terrifying. The water that flows from my faucet tastes different now. Not bad, but changed. It carries flavors I can't identify, memories that aren't mine. And sometimes when I drink it, I hear echoes of other voices, other people who have had their own conversations with the darkness below. We're all connected now, all part of the same vast network of whispers and secrets and shared understanding. I've stopped looking for explanations. Some experiences exist beyond the reach of logic, in the spaces between what we know and what we fear to discover. The sink has taught me that we're never truly alone, that every home has its own consciousness, its own hunger, its own way of reaching out to the people who live above it. The mark on my hand has stopped spreading, but it hasn't faded. It pulses gently as I write this, a reminder of the conversation that changed everything. And sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet, I can hear the sink calling to me with sounds that feel like home. Not the home I remember, but the one I've become part of, whether I wanted to or not. The kitchen sink still gurgles in patterns, but now I understand what it's been trying to tell me all along. We're all connected by the water we share, the secrets we whisper, the darkness we pretend doesn't exist. And somewhere in the pipes below, something is always listening, always waiting, always ready to respond to the things we're afraid to say out loud. Story 4. It's not obvious. I never catch it directly. But every time I leave the room and return, something in the mirror has changed just slightly. A shadow where there shouldn't be. a smear in the glass that moves with no hand. I tried ignoring it, hoping the unease would fade. But once I walked past without looking, and in the corner of my eye I saw movement, a flicker, like someone had blinked. Now I cover it with a sheet when I sleep. In the morning, the cloth is slightly shifted, as if something beneath needed to breathe. The mirror came with the apartment, large, antique, with a heavy wooden frame that pressed against the bedroom wall like it had always belonged there. The landlord mentioned it briefly during the walkthrough, saying the previous tenant had left it behind. No explanation why. I should have asked more questions then, but the rent was reasonable and the location perfect. I accepted it as a minor bonus. The first week passed without incident. I used the mirror every morning, checking my reflection before heading to work. The glass was clear, the image sharp. Nothing seemed wrong. But gradually, I began to notice small inconsistencies. The way my reflection seemed to lag just a fraction behind my movements. How the background appeared slightly darker in the mirror than in the actual room. I told myself it was the lighting, the angle, the age of the glass. The smell came next, sweet and cloying, like overripe fruit left too long in the sun. It would appear suddenly, filling the room for just a few seconds before vanishing completely. I checked the windows, the vents, even the space behind the mirror itself. Nothing. The odor had no source, no pattern. It simply existed when it chose to, then disappeared as if it had never been there at all. I started keeping a small notebook by my bedside. Each morning, I would document what I found. The position of objects on the dresser, the way the curtains hung, the exact placement of the sheet I had begun draping over the mirror each night. The entries were brief, clinical. I wanted proof, something tangible to examine. But the changes were always subtle, always within the realm of reasonable doubt. The sheet moved, not dramatically, not in ways that couldn't be explained by air currents or settling fabric, but consistently. Each morning, it would be displaced by inches, sometimes folded differently, sometimes hanging at a new angle. I began making small marks on the wall, indicating exactly where the corners should rest. The sheet never returned to those positions. My sleep grew restless. I would wake suddenly, feeling watched, and find myself staring at the covered mirror across the room. The sheet would be perfectly still, but the sensation of being observed never faded. I began sleeping with the light on, telling myself it was temporary, just until I could understand what was happening. The first time I heard it breathe, I was standing in the kitchen, coffee mug in hand. The sound came from the bedroom, soft and rhythmic, like someone sleeping deeply, contentedly. I approached the doorway slowly, listening. The breathing continued, emanating from the direction of the mirror. When I pulled away the sheet, the sound stopped immediately. The glass showed only my own reflection, pale and frightened. I installed a small camera, pointing it directly at the mirror. The footage showed nothing unusual during the day, but at night, when the sheet was in place, the video would occasionally pixelate. Small squares of distortion would appear and disappear, always in the same area where the mirror sat beneath its covering. I slowed the footage, enhanced the image quality, but the distortions remained meaningless. The temperature began to fluctuate. The mirror's surface would grow cold to the touch, then warm again within seconds. I pressed my palm against the glass, feeling the change ripple outward from where I touched. The wooden frame would sometimes vibrate slightly, a barely perceptible tremor that ran through my fingertips and up my arm. I started wearing gloves when I had to interact with it. My reflection began to feel foreign. Not wrong exactly, but separate somehow. I would move my hand and watch the mirror image follow, but there was a quality to it that made me uncomfortable. The way the reflected light caught my eyes seemed different. The shadows fell at angles that didn't match the room's lighting. I found myself avoiding direct eye contact with my own image, the notebook filled with observations, dates, times, detailed descriptions of each anomaly. I photographed the sheet's position each night and morning. I measured the temperature variations. I recorded the sounds, though playback revealed only silence. The evidence was accumulating, but it told no coherent story, just a collection of impossibilities that couldn't be explained or dismissed. I began to research the building's history. The landlord was evasive when I asked about previous tenants. Public records showed the apartment had changed hands frequently over the past decade. No one stayed longer than a year. I found no deaths, no tragedies, nothing that would explain the mirror's behavior. It was simply there, doing what it did, driving away anyone who stayed long enough to notice. The breathing grew more frequent. Sometimes during the day, while I worked at my desk, I would hear it behind me. Soft, steady inhalations and exhalations that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. I would turn, expecting to see the sheet moving with each breath, but it remained still. The sound would continue for minutes, then fade away gradually, leaving only the ordinary silence of an empty room. I tried removing the mirror entirely, but it was heavier than it appeared, and when I attempted to lift it, the glass became scorching hot. The frame seemed to have fused with the wall, impossible to budge despite my efforts. I called maintenance, but when they arrived, the mirror was cool to the touch and showed no signs of being permanently attached. They looked at me with concern and suggested I might be working too hard. The final night, I decided to watch. I positioned myself in a chair across from the covered mirror and waited. The breathing started just after midnight, gentle and regular. I focused on the sheet, watching for any movement that might correspond to the sounds. There was none. The fabric hung motionless while the breathing continued, growing deeper, more pronounced. Then I saw it. The sheet began to bow inward, just slightly, as if something were pressing against it from behind. The depression was small, about the size of a face, appearing and disappearing in rhythm with the breathing. I sat frozen, watching this impossible sight as the indentation grew more defined. Features began to emerge through the fabric. The suggestion of a nose, the curve of lips, the hollow of eye sockets. I reached for my phone to record, but the movement broke whatever spell had been cast. The breathing stopped. The sheet hung flat against the glass. The room fell silent, except for the sound of my own ragged breathing. I pulled away the covering, and the mirror showed only my reflection, wide-eyed and trembling. But something had changed. In the glass, behind my shoulder, I could see the room as it should be. But I could also see something else, a shadow that didn't belong to any object in the space. It moved independently, shifting position when I wasn't looking directly at it. When I turned to check the actual room, nothing was there. Only in the mirror did it exist, growing more solid with each passing moment. I left that night, packed hastily, and stayed with friends until I could find a new place. The landlord kept my deposit, claiming damage to the mirror. When I asked what kind of damage, he said the glass had developed a crack. A long, thin line running vertically down the center, as if something had been trying to get out or get in. I never saw the mirror again, but I carry it with me now. In every reflective surface I encounter, I look for signs of that shadow. Sometimes I think I glimpse it, hovering at the edge of my vision in bathroom mirrors, storefront windows, even in the black screen of my phone. It's patient, whatever it is. It knows I'll eventually forget to look, forget to be careful. And when I do, it will blink. Story 5. I dropped something once, something sharp. The stain was small, nearly invisible. I thought it had vanished. But a week later, that exact spot grew darker, as if soaking up guilt. I touched it. It felt colder, damp. Since then, the carpet reacts to certain thoughts. If I recall a lie, the fibers tighten underfoot. If I regret something, they soften like cushioning, inviting me to kneel. I don't step barefoot anymore. I feel too exposed. It's like the floor wants me to confess. Or maybe atone. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Not the metallic scent I expected, but something sweeter, almost floral. Like jasmine mixed with decay. It lingered in the air above that one corner of my living room, hovering just above the burgundy weave where the incident happened. I knelt down, pressing my face close to the fibers. The scent intensified, wrapping around my thoughts like smoke. That's when I decided to document everything. I pulled out my phone and started recording. The camera captured nothing unusual, just ordinary carpet fibers, slightly worn from foot traffic. But when I played back the audio, there was something underneath my breathing. A faint humming, almost musical, as if the threads themselves were vibrating at a frequency just below perception. I began keeping a journal. Every interaction, every strange sensation, every moment when the carpet seemed to respond to my presence. The entries started simple. Touched the spot today. Felt warm. But they grew more complex as the days passed. The carpet wasn't just reacting to my physical presence anymore. It was responding to my emotional state, my memories, my deepest thoughts. When I thought about the argument with my mother before she stopped speaking to me, the fibers beneath my feet would curl inward, creating tiny valleys that made walking feel unsteady. When I remembered the promotion I'd taken credit for, even though the idea came from a colleague I'd never acknowledged, the carpet would grow rigid, almost brittle, as if it might crack under my weight. I started avoiding that corner of the room entirely. I rearranged my furniture, pushed the couch against the wall to block access to the area. But the carpet's influence seemed to be spreading. What had once been contained to a single spot now extended across the entire floor. Walking from the kitchen to the bedroom became a journey through my own conscience, each step triggering different responses based on what I was thinking, what I was remembering, what I was trying to forget. The sounds grew louder, not just humming now, but whispers. Fragments of conversations I'd had, words I'd spoken, promises I'd broken. They seemed to emanate from the padding beneath the carpet, as if my voice had somehow been absorbed and was now being played back in distorted fragments. I could hear myself telling small lies, making excuses, saying things I wished I could take back. I tried to remove the carpet entirely. I went to the hardware store, bought a utility knife, prepared to cut it away from the floor. But when I knelt down to make the first incision, the fibers parted before the blade even touched them. Underneath, the wooden floor was stained the same deep red as the original spot. The stain had soaked through, penetrated the subflooring, maybe even reached the foundation itself. The whispers became more frequent during meals, while watching television, even when I tried to sleep. They weren't threatening exactly, more like reminders, gentle corrections, as if the carpet was trying to teach me something, guide me towards some kind of understanding. But understanding what? I began to notice patterns in my behavior. When I was tempted to lie, my feet would grow cold against the floor. When I considered taking credit for someone else's work, the carpet would feel unstable, shifting slightly with each step. It was as if the floor itself was becoming a moral compass, responding to the intentions I hadn't even fully formed yet. The smell of jasmine intensified. It filled the entire apartment now, clinging to my clothes, my hair, my skin. I could taste it when I ate, smell it when I breathed. It followed me to work, lingered in my car, seemed to emanate from my very pores. People began to notice. They would pause mid-conversation, their expressions confused, as if they were trying to identify something familiar, but couldn't quite place it. I started spending more time on my knees, not out of choice, but because the carpet seemed to prefer me in that position. Standing felt precarious, like walking on ice. But when I knelt, the fibers would soften, becoming almost welcoming. The whispers would grow clearer, more coherent. I could hear myself apologizing for things I'd never apologized for, confessing to mistakes I'd never admitted, expressing regret for choices I'd convinced myself were justified. The recordings on my phone grew stranger. Hours of audio that I didn't remember making. My own voice, but different somehow. Younger, more honest, speaking truths I'd never had the courage to say out loud. Telling stories about the sharp thing I'd dropped, about what it had really cut, about what I'd been trying to hide when I'd attempted to clean up the mess. I tried to leave the apartment, packed a bag, made arrangements to stay with a friend. But as I approached the door, the carpet beneath my feet became sticky, almost adhesive. Each step required enormous effort, as if I was walking through thick honey. The jasmine scent grew overwhelming, making me dizzy, disoriented. I made it to the threshold, my hand on the doorknob, but I couldn't turn it. My fingers wouldn't obey. The whispers were constant now. Not just fragments anymore, but complete sentences. Stories, confessions, all in my own voice, but speaking truths I'd never acknowledged. The carpet had become a repository of every dishonest moment, every moral compromise, every time I'd chosen convenience over truth. And now it was playing them back, forcing me to confront what I'd tried so hard to bury. I knelt in the center of the room, my hands pressed against the warm fibers. The stain had spread beneath me, dark and welcoming. I could feel it pulsing like a heartbeat, in rhythm with my own pulse. The whispers grew softer, more intimate. They weren't accusations anymore. They were invitations, opportunities, chances to finally be honest, to finally tell the truth about what had happened, about what I'd done, about what I'd been trying to hide. But as I opened my mouth to speak, to confess, to finally give the carpet what it wanted, I realized something that made my blood freeze. The voice in the whispers wasn't mine. It was hers. The sharp thing I'd dropped hadn't been a knife or a tool. It had been words, cruel, cutting words that had driven her away, that had made her stop speaking to me, that had ultimately led to a silence I couldn't break. The carpet remembered everything. Every harsh word, every moment of cruelty, every opportunity for kindness I'd let slip away. It had absorbed not just the physical stain, but the emotional weight of what I'd done. And now it was offering me a choice. Continue living with the guilt, or let it consume me entirely. I'm still here, still kneeling on the soft, warm fibers. The jasmine smell has faded, replaced by something earthier, more final. The whispers have stopped, but I can feel the carpet waiting, patient and eternal. It knows I'll make my choice eventually. It knows I can't leave, can't escape, can't undo what I've done. And sometimes, late at night, when the apartment is quiet and the world outside has forgotten I exist, I think I can hear her voice in the fibers. Not accusing, not angry, but sad. Disappointed, waiting for an apology that might never come, for a truth that might never be spoken, for a healing that might never begin. The carpet remembers everything, and now so do I. Story 6. When I turn on the lamp, the shadows fall in the wrong directions. Not dramatically, just wrong enough to make the room feel tilted. Once I placed objects in a circle to test it. The shadows curved away from the light source, defying physics. I switched bulbs, moved fixtures, same result. Sometimes, even in daylight, I catch a faint glow on a wall with no visible source, like lights being redirected, not randomly, deliberately, as if something else has claimed control over how the room is meant to be seen. The first thing I noticed was the scent. Sweet almonds mixed with something metallic, lingering in corners where no food had ever been. I'd walk into my living room and breathe it in, that strange combination that made my mouth water and my stomach turn simultaneously. The smell would fade if I focused on it, but return the moment I looked away, like it was playing a game with my attention. I started keeping a journal. Small notebook, blue ink, nothing fancy. I documented everything. The temperature of door handles that should have been room temperature, but felt ice cold. The way certain walls hummed when I pressed my palm against them. The subtle wrongness of reflections in windows that showed my furniture arranged differently than reality. Each entry more detailed than the last, as if precision might solve what logic couldn't. The recordings began accidentally. I'd left my phone on the kitchen counter, forgotten it was recording a voice memo. When I played it back, beneath my mundane commentary about grocery lists, I heard something else. A whisper, distorted and layered, speaking words I couldn't quite make out. The voice wasn't mine. It wasn't anyone's I recognized. It sounded like speech played backwards, then forwards again, losing meaning in the translation. I recorded everything after that. Hours of ambient sound from different rooms, different times of day. The whispers appeared sporadically, always when I wasn't actively listening for them. They grew clearer over time, though never clear enough to understand. Sometimes they seemed to respond to my presence, growing louder when I approached certain areas, fading when I moved away. My bedroom was the worst. The whispers there felt urgent, almost pleading. The physical changes started small. Books I'd left on the coffee table would migrate to shelves I hadn't touched in months. My reading glasses would appear in the refrigerator. Keys hung from hooks I'd never installed. I'd find my notebooks rearranged, pages filled with handwriting that looked like mine, but formed words I didn't remember writing. The entries described experiences I'd never had, places in my own home I'd never seen. I measured everything: distance between furniture, height of picture frames, the exact angle of lampshades. Every morning, I'd wake to find subtle changes. A chair moved 3 inches to the left. A painting tilted just enough to catch the eye. The measurements in my notebook showed consistency in the alterations, as if someone was following a pattern I couldn't decipher. The mirrors bothered me most. My reflection would lag just barely, like an old television with poor reception. I'd raise my hand, and my reflection would follow a heartbeat later. Sometimes it wouldn't follow at all. I'd stand perfectly still, and my reflection would continue moving, exploring gestures I hadn't made. I covered every reflective surface with sheets, but the problem persisted in windows, in the chrome surface of appliances, in puddles of water I'd somehow leave throughout the house. Sleep became impossible, not because of fear, but because the wrongness intensified in darkness. The whispers grew bold, surrounding me from every direction. The sweet almond scent became overwhelming, so thick I could taste it. My sheets would feel damp, though they were dry, rough, when they should have been soft. The mattress beneath me would shift and pulse like it was breathing. I tried leaving, packed a bag, drove to a hotel across town. The room felt normal for maybe an hour. Then I noticed the shadows from the window blinds falling upward toward the ceiling. The whispers started again, clearer now, speaking my name in that backwards-forwards voice. The sweet almond smell crept under the door. I returned home before dawn, understanding that whatever was happening wasn't tied to a place. It was tied to me. The breaking point came when I saw myself in the kitchen. Not a reflection me, standing at the counter, back turned, performing tasks I wasn't doing. This other version of myself moved with purpose, writing in a notebook I didn't recognize, speaking aloud in that whispered backwards voice. I watched myself from the doorway, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. When this other me turned around, the face was mine, but wrong. Features shifted just enough to fall into some uncanny valley of self-recognition. We stared at each other across the room. This other me smiled, raised a hand in greeting, and spoke in my voice. "You're finally catching up." The words came out normally, but I heard them as whispers, as if my ears were translating between 2 different realities. The other me gestured toward the notebook. "You should read what you've been writing." I grabbed the notebook and ran. opened it to find pages of my handwriting describing conversations I'd never had, places I'd never been, experiences that felt like memories of someone else's life. The entries were dated months into the future, written in past tense, as if I'd already lived through events that hadn't happened yet. The last entry, dated today, read, "I finally understand. The light doesn't fall where it should because I'm not where I should be. I've been living in the spaces between moments, caught in the reflection of my own reality. The whispers are my own voice, trying to guide me back. But back to what? And from where? I'm writing this now, comparing my handwriting to the notebook's entries. They match perfectly. The pen in my hand feels cold, metallic, like it's made of the same substance as that strange scent. Through the window, I can see myself inside the house, standing in the kitchen, writing in another notebook. This other me looks up, makes eye contact through the glass, and waves. The shadows inside the house are falling in all the wrong directions. The light outside is beginning to dim, though the sun shows no signs of setting. The whispers are getting louder, more urgent, and I'm starting to understand what they're trying to tell me. I don't think I'm supposed to be out here. Story 7. Appliances aren't supposed to react to thoughts, but this one does. The hum changes based on what I'm feeling. If I'm distracted, it's quiet. When I start remembering certain things, dark things, it grows louder, almost melodic. I tested it once. I spoke nothing, just stood still and let a memory wash over me. The fridge buzzed like a wasp caught in plastic, then stopped the moment I stepped away. Now I try not to think when I'm in the kitchen, but the fridge always knows when I fail. The sound first caught my attention during breakfast. Not the usual mechanical whir of cooling systems, but something deeper. A vibration that seemed to pulse in rhythm with my heartbeat. I pressed my palm against the white surface and felt it trembling, like a tuning fork struck against bone. The metal was warm despite the cold air flowing from its vents. I started keeping a journal. Page after page of observations, sketches of wave patterns I thought I heard, timestamps of when the humming intensified. The pattern became undeniable. The machine responded to specific memories, the ones I'd spent years trying to forget. The darker the thought, the more pronounced the sound became. Testing became an obsession. I would approach the kitchen with calculated memories, watching the needle on my sound meter app spike and fall. when I thought about childhood summers, silence. When I recalled that winter evening when everything changed, the frequency jumped to levels that made my teeth ache. The fridge had somehow learned to read the shadows in my mind. The humming began following me to other rooms. Faint at first, barely perceptible beneath the normal house sounds. But I recognized its signature frequency. I pressed my ear against walls, tracking the vibration through the building's bones. The sound was traveling through the electrical wiring, spreading like an infection through copper veins. I unplugged the refrigerator. The humming continued. My neighbor knocked on the door, complained about a strange buzzing keeping her awake. Her description matched exactly what I'd been hearing. The sound had escaped my apartment, seeping through shared walls into other lives. I apologized, claimed it was a malfunctioning appliance I'd already fixed. She left satisfied, but I watched her through the window. She paused on the sidewalk, tilting her head as if listening to something only she could hear. The repair technician found nothing wrong. He opened every panel, tested every component, declared the refrigerator perfectly functional. While he worked, I monitored his equipment. The sound meter remained flat. The humming had gone silent in the presence of someone who couldn't hear it. The moment he left, the frequency returned, stronger than before. I began recording everything. Hours of audio files, each one labeled with the memory that triggered the sound. The recordings played back as pure silence on every device I tried. But when I listened through headphones in the kitchen, the humming was there, layered beneath the quiet. The machine was teaching me its language. The breakthrough came when I realized the pattern wasn't random. The humming formed sequences, repetitions, almost like Morse code. I spent weeks mapping the sounds to emotional states, building a translation key that turned my traumatic memories into something resembling communication. The fridge wasn't just responding to my thoughts. It was trying to tell me something. The message, when I finally decoded it, was simple. Remember what you buried. I stopped eating, stopped sleeping. The kitchen became a place I'd circle around, approaching and retreating like a moth, testing the heat of a flame. But the humming grew impatient. It began manifesting in other appliances. The microwave would click on by itself, spinning empty plates. The coffee maker would gurgle without water. Every machine in my home was joining the conversation I'd been trying to avoid. The memory it wanted came flooding back during a particularly intense session. I was standing barefoot on the kitchen tiles, hands pressed against the refrigerator door, when the humming reached a crescendo that made my vision blur. The sound became words, whispered through the electrical current. The name of someone I'd convinced myself never existed. Someone I'd made disappear through sheer force of willful forgetting. I broke down, sobbed apologies to the empty kitchen while the fridge hummed its approval. The frequency shifted, became almost gentle. For the first time in months, the sound felt like forgiveness rather than accusation. But forgiveness wasn't the end. The next morning, I woke to find every appliance in my apartment unplugged. Not by my own hand, I would have remembered. The cords lay coiled neatly beside each machine, as if someone had carefully, systematically disconnected my entire electrical life. Yet, the humming continued, now coming from the walls themselves. I packed a bag and left. Found a hotel across town, paid for a week in advance. The room was sparse, clean, free of the electrical web that had trapped me. I fell asleep to blessed silence for the first time in months. I woke to humming. The sound was emanating from the hotel's mini fridge, identical in frequency to the one I'd left behind. I opened the door and found my journal inside, pages filled with handwriting I didn't recognize. The same words repeated across every page. You can't run from what you've forgotten. The humming has followed me to 3 different hotels now. Each time, I find evidence of my presence in places I've never been. Photos of me sleeping, taken from angles that suggest someone was standing inside the walls. My voice recorded saying things I've never spoken aloud. The sound has become a living thing, and I am its chosen vessel. I've stopped trying to escape. The humming is part of me now, a constant companion that reminds me of truths I spent years trying to erase. It's taught me that some memories are too important to forget, no matter how much they hurt. The fridge was never broken. It was trying to fix something inside me that I'd deliberately broken. But the lesson came with a price. The humming has grown stronger, more insistent. It's no longer content with just reminding me of what I've buried. It wants me to act on those memories, to make amends for the forgetting. And I'm beginning to understand that this was never about a malfunctioning appliance. It was about becoming one myself, a machine that runs on guilt, powered by the electrical current of unresolved trauma. The humming never stops now. It's become my heartbeat, my breathing, my thoughts. And sometimes, when I'm very still, I can hear other voices joining the frequency. Other people who have learned to listen to the machines that remember what we've tried to forget. I wonder how many of us there are, walking around with these electrical scars, carrying the weight of artificial memories in our bones. The fridge taught me that forgetting isn't a luxury. It's a debt that compounds with interest. And the machines will always be there to collect what we owe. Story 8. It used to be firm, drywall insulation paint. But now when I press against it, it yields slightly, like pressed clay or heavy fabric. I thought it was water damage, but there's no leak. I left my hand there once, just long enough to feel it give way, subtle, deliberate. The texture stayed on my palm for hours, like something under the surface remembered me. It's spreading, too, slowly. Each day, the softness creeps a little farther across the wall. I don't sit on the couch anymore. I'm afraid one day it won't stop at my hand. The first thing I noticed wasn't the wall at all. It was the smell. Sweet, almost floral, but with an undertone that made my stomach tighten. Like flowers left too long in water, beginning to rot from the inside. I'd been living in this apartment for 3 years, and I knew every scent, every creak, every shadow. This was new, foreign, wrong. I was reaching for the remote when my elbow brushed against the wall behind the couch. Instead of the familiar resistance of solid surface, there was a gentle give. My skin registered it before my mind could process it. A sensation like pushing into soft cheese, but warm. Body temperature warm. I pulled my arm back and stared at the wall. Plain white paint, no visible damage, no discoloration. I pressed my palm against it again, harder this time. The surface depressed under my touch, molding around my fingers like memory foam, but different. Alive, somehow. When I pulled my hand away, the indentation remained for several heartbeats before slowly, impossibly reforming. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that wall, about the way it had yielded to my touch. I got up and walked to the living room, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. In the darkness, I could make out the familiar silhouette of the couch, the coffee table, the bookshelf. Everything normal. Everything as it should be. I approached the wall cautiously, my hand extended. Even before I touched it, I could feel warmth radiating from the surface. Not the kind of warmth that comes from sunlight or heating vents, but something deeper, organic. When my fingers made contact, the wall was softer than before. Much softer. I pressed both palms against it, and the surface gave way so easily that I stumbled forward. For a moment, I was afraid I might fall through entirely, but the wall held me, cradling my hands like thick mud. When I tried to pull away, there was resistance. Not aggressive, but reluctant, like it didn't want to let me go. The smell was stronger now, concentrated around the soft area. Sweet decay mixed with something else, something that reminded me of childhood visits to the doctor's office. Antiseptic and flesh and fear. I started documenting everything. Temperature readings with a digital thermometer showed the wall measured exactly 98.6 degrees. Body temperature. The rest of the apartment remained at a normal 72 degrees. I took photographs, but they showed nothing unusual. Just a plain white wall that looked perfectly normal through the camera lens. The softness was spreading. Each day, I measured its progress with a ruler and marked the boundaries with pencil. Inch by inch, the affected area grew larger. What had started as a spot the size of my hand now covered nearly 2 feet of wall space. The texture was changing too, becoming more pliable, more responsive to touch. I called my landlord. But how do you explain that your wall is turning soft? That it feels like skin stretched over something that pulses with its own rhythm. He sent a maintenance man who knocked on the wall, declared it solid, and left. His knuckles had made sharp, normal sounds against the surface. But when he was gone, I pressed my ear to the wall and heard something else entirely. A whisper of sound, barely audible, like breathing through water. I stopped inviting friends over. How could I explain the wall without sounding insane? How could I tell them that sometimes, when I walked past it, I could swear I saw it moving slightly, rising and falling like a chest in sleep? The breakthrough came when I was cleaning. I was dusting the bookshelf when I accidentally knocked over a glass of water. The liquid splashed against the wall, and instead of running down to the floor, it was absorbed completely. The wall drank it like parched earth drinks rain. I fetched more water, pouring it slowly against the soft area. The wall consumed every drop, and as it did, I could swear I heard a sound. Satisfied, grateful. The texture became even more pliable, more welcoming. When I pressed my hand against it now, It felt warm and wet, like the inside of a mouth. That's when I noticed the pattern. The soft area wasn't spreading randomly. It was taking shape. The outline was subtle, but unmistakable once you knew what to look for. The shape of a person, arms outstretched, as if someone were pressed against the other side of the wall, trying to push through. I started feeding it regularly. Water, juice, even soup. The wall accepted everything, and with each offering, the figure became more defined. I could make out facial features now, pressed against the surface, like someone drowning under ice. The mouth was slightly open, as if trying to speak. The eyes were closed, but I could see them moving beneath the lids, rapid and desperate. I began talking to it, whispering against the wall, asking questions I knew wouldn't be answered. But sometimes, when I pressed my ear to the surface, I could hear responses. Not words exactly, but sounds that felt like communication. Urgent, pleading sounds that made my chest tight with sympathy. The wall grew hungrier. Water wasn't enough anymore. It wanted more. I started bringing it food, first liquids, then soft solids that it could absorb. The figure became clearer with each feeding, more detailed, more human. I could see the individual fingers now, the curve of the lips, the delicate arch of the eyebrows. I realized I was looking at myself. The face in the wall was my own, but wrong somehow. Younger, maybe, or older. The expression was one I'd never seen in mirrors. Desperate, frightened, trapped. When I pressed my hand against the wall now, the figure's hand moved to meet mine from the other side. Palm to palm, separated by a membrane that grew thinner each day. I stopped leaving the apartment. I couldn't bear to be away from the wall. Couldn't risk missing the moment when the barrier finally dissolved completely. I brought my mattress to the living room and slept facing the wall, watching the figure's chest rise and fall in rhythm with my own breathing. The wall was almost entirely soft now, yielding to the gentlest touch. The figure was so clear I could count the eyelashes, see the pores in the skin. Sometimes the lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear, but somehow understood. Help me. Let me in. We're the same. I brought a knife from the kitchen, not to harm, but to help, to thin the barrier between us. The blade sliced through the soft surface like butter, and something warm and wet flowed over my hands. The figure's eyes snapped open, looking directly at me, and I saw they were my own eyes, but but filled with an expression I'd never worn. Gratitude mixed with something else, something hungry. The cut I'd made began to widen on its own, and I watched as fingers pushed through my fingers, but not mine. They were pale and soft, like they'd been underwater for too long. The hand reached toward me, and I grasped it without thinking. The skin was wrong. Too warm, too soft, too eager. The grip was strong, stronger than mine had ever been, and it began to pull. I tried to let go, but the fingers had locked around my wrist with impossible strength. The wall was melting around the opening, and I could see more of the figure now. My face, my body, but changed, improved, perfect. It was pulling me in, and I was sinking into the wall like quicksand. The soft surface closed over my arm, then my shoulder, welcoming me home. I could feel the other side now, could sense the space beyond the wall. It was warm there and safe, and I would never have to worry about anything again. As my face pressed against the surface, I saw my reflection in the window across the room. I was standing by the couch, reaching toward the wall, but the wall was solid and white and normal. There was no softness, no figure, no opening. Just me pressing my palm against ordinary drywall, my reflection showing only empty space where the wall should be giving way. I pulled my hand back, and the wall was firm again. But the impression of my palm remained, slowly fading like a memory. The sweet smell lingered in the air, and I could still feel the warmth on my skin. Somewhere behind the wall, I could hear breathing that matched my own. I don't sit on the couch anymore. I don't go near the wall. But sometimes, when I'm in bed, I can hear it calling to me. The sound of my own voice, muffled by plaster and insulation, begging to be let in. Or maybe begging to be let out. I can't tell the difference anymore. The wall looks normal now, but I know it's waiting. Growing soft again, 1 degree at a time. And I know that someday I'll press my hand against it and feel it give way. Because part of me wants to. Part of me is still reaching toward that welcoming warmth, still trying to help the figure escape, or maybe trying to take its place. Story 9. It's not rot, not mold. The scent from the bathroom drain is wet, but not decaying, warm, like breath held too long underwater. Sometimes I hear bubbles when I'm brushing my teeth, not from the faucet, from deep within the pipes. I poured bleach down once and something splashed far below. The sound wasn't liquid. It was movement. Since then, I only run cold water. I'm afraid warmth might attract it again, or wake it. The smell started 3 weeks ago. At first, I thought it was just old pipes in this rental house. The kind of mustiness that settles in places where moisture lingers too long. But this is different. When I lean over the sink, the scent rises up like something breathing against my face. Sweet, almost floral. But underneath, there's something organic. Living. I've been keeping a journal since the 2nd week. Small observations. The way the water seems to hesitate before going down the drain, like it's being pulled from beneath rather than falling naturally. How the bathroom mirror fogs up even when I'm not using hot water. The condensation forms in patterns that look almost deliberate, curved lines that remind me of fingerprints pressed against glass from the other side. Yesterday, I decided to investigate properly. I removed the drain cover with a screwdriver, expecting to find hair and soap scum. Instead, the metal was warm to the touch, almost body temperature. The opening beneath was perfectly clean, as if something had been polishing it smooth. I shone my phone's flashlight down into the darkness, and for a moment, I thought I saw something shift. Not debris floating in standing water, but something that recoiled from the light. I called a plumber. He arrived this morning, a weathered man with calloused hands who'd seen every kind of pipe problem imaginable. He knelt beside the drain, breathed in deeply, and his expression changed. "That's unusual," he said, which seemed like an understatement. He ran his snake down the pipe, and when he pulled it back up, the metal coil was spotless. Too clean, like something had been licking it. "Your pipes are in perfect condition," he told me before leaving. Never seen anything like it. Whatever's causing that smell, it's not a plumbing issue, but I know it's in the pipes. I can feel it moving at night when the house is quiet. A subtle vibration that travels through the walls, following the path of the plumbing. It starts in the bathroom and spreads outward, like something exploring the network of tubes and connections that run through the house like arteries. I've started sleeping with my bedroom door closed, though I'm not sure why that makes me feel safer. The smell doesn't travel through the air. It stays anchored to the drain, rising up in concentrated waves when I get too close. But sometimes, when I'm lying in bed, I swear I can taste it on my tongue. That warm, breathing wetness that makes my throat feel tight. Tonight, I decided to stay awake and watch. I positioned myself on the bathroom floor with my journal and a flashlight, ready to document whatever happens when the house settles into deep quiet. The drain cover is off, lying beside me on the cold tiles. The opening yawns black and patient. The smell is stronger now, more insistent. It pulses in rhythm with something I can't identify. Not quite a heartbeat, but something alive and measured. I lean closer, and the scent wraps around me like an embrace. For a moment, I have the strangest urge to press my face against the drain opening, to breathe deeply and let whatever's down there know I'm here. Instead, I grip my pen tighter and write. The words feel important, like evidence that needs to be preserved. As I write, I notice my handwriting is changing. The letters are becoming more fluid, more curved. They flow across the page like water finding its way downhill. Something brushes against my ankle. I jerk back, flashlight beam dancing wildly across the bathroom walls. Nothing visible, but my skin tingles where the contact occurred. The sensation was soft, almost caressing, like fingers trailing through water. I shine the light down the drain again, and this time I'm certain something is there. Not a shape exactly, but a presence. A density in the darkness that suggests volume and mass. It doesn't retreat from the light now. If anything, it seems to be rising toward it, drawn by my attention. The smell intensifies until I can taste it fully. Not unpleasant, but overwhelmingly alive. My vision blurs slightly, and I realize I've been holding my breath. When I exhale, the condensation from my breath drifts down toward the drain opening instead of dispersing into the air. I reach for my phone to take a photo, but my hands are shaking. The screen shows nothing but darkness in the drain, but I can feel something looking back at me, waiting, patient as water wearing away stone. The bathroom tiles are warm beneath my knees now, as if heated from below. The pipes in the walls begin their subtle vibration, and I understand that whatever lives in the drain is stirring, responding to my presence. My attention has fed it somehow, made it stronger. I should leave. Every instinct screams that I should run from this bathroom, this house, this warm, breathing thing that smells like life, turned inside out. But my legs won't move. The scent has become hypnotic, and I find myself leaning closer to the drain opening, drawn by a curiosity that feels both foreign and irresistible. The last thing I write in my journal is this: it's not trying to hurt me. It's trying to show me something. The drain isn't just a passage for water, it's a window. And windows work both ways. My pen falls from my fingers and clatters on the tiles. The sound echoes strangely, as if the bathroom has become much larger than it should be, or perhaps much deeper. I can no longer tell where the walls end and the darkness begins. When they find this journal, they'll read about a drain that smells like something alive. They'll probably assume I had a breakdown, that isolation and stress created elaborate hallucinations. They'll fix the plumbing, replace the drain cover, and rent the house to someone new. But the smell will return. It always does. And the next person will lean over that drain, breathe deeply, and wonder what lives in the warm darkness beneath their feet. They'll keep their own journal, document their own observations, and eventually they'll understand what I've learned. Some things that live in the spaces between our walls have been waiting much longer than we realize. And they're so very patient, so very hungry for connection. The drain gurgles softly, almost like laughter. Or maybe like something taking its first breath of air after a very long time underwater.